afternoon. I'm Rana, and before we get started with our show, I have a couple of announcements to make, very quick ones. Safe Futures has a few events coming up that I found out too late to get on our community calendar. Tomorrow night, they have a benefit at Port and Starboard at Ocean Beach. October 26th, on Saturday, they have a rugby match that benefits Safe Futures. That organization was formerly the Women's Center. And I think they changed the name because they wanted to reach out to men and women, both, who were in domestic violence situations. And then on October 27th, they have a hot cider walk and rally that is, I'm not sure where it is. Anyway, if you go to their website, safefuturesct.org, there's all the information. And if you call in, we can give you the info as well. Okay, my guest tonight, we're actually going to do a little bit of a different format tonight. I have a guest for the first half who will be the host for the second half while I am guest. So at some point, maybe during the community calendar in the middle, we'll switch seats.
Sounds like a plan.
So that our guest can man the phones.
All right.
So tonight's guest is Ian Thomas, and I'm sure most of you have seen Ian on the air or around town. But Ian has embarked on a new, sort of new endeavor.
A reinvention.
Yeah. I guess I just want to ask you, you've been interested in the media for a long time. So how did you start out? I know you were involved with Scope magazine way back when.
Well, I'll try to keep this as brief as possible.
Sure.
But once upon a time, back in 2003, I was back home in between trips, and I discovered this magazine called The Scope, and it was stridently covering things and presenting points of view that were not prevalent at all in the commercial media at the time. And this was during the time of the run-up to the war in Iraq, and just a couple years after 9/11. And I was very concerned with the general direction of the country and the reaction to these traumatic events. And so I reached out to the founders of the magazine and presented myself as someone who's interested in writing, and started writing for them in 2003, and over the years increasingly became more and more involved with that magazine, and eventually became the managing editor. And then as the founders kind of moved on in life, I approached them about carrying the magazine on in my own way, and that went on. I took over as editor-in-chief in 2012 is when we launched the ScopeMagazine.com website.
Now, had it had a web presence before that at all?
Not a strong one, not a strong one. And that was one of the things that I wanted to bring to it, was a little more dynamic engagement with the community. One of the criticisms of the Scope was that it was inconsistent and slanted and not very interactive with the community. It just sort of like would occasionally shoot out of the ether and scatter across the streets, and people would read it and think what they wanted to think. So I wanted to make it a more community-rooted thing. That was one of my big draws to the idea of the magazine, was local independent media, and serving as a counterpoint to the driving narratives and the tremendous filters through which we get our information from the commercial media and the larger sources. So yeah, there was no strong web presence from its inception in 2002 until 2012. And so we kicked off the website in, I want to say, February or March of 2012. And we were pretty much strictly online for that first year. of operation. That was kind of experimenting and working with a number of people in town, trying to find the right collaborators to really try to take this thing to the next level, while also trying to figure out exactly what it is I wanted to do with the magazine and how best to interact. And over that year, in 2013, in the spring of 2013, we returned to print and had the dual presence, online and in print. And that got really exciting for a short bit of time. And then we found some limitations in that paradigm, both with the website that we had was limited in its mechanism, and also just the sort of the long history of the scope. While some would see that as a boon for publication, actually became a bit of a burden due to the historical slants and positions that the magazine had taken. Also, just relationships in town that the founders had. So I just found and plus my own relationship with the founders had evolved. So I just found the best idea. After we put out 2 print editions, we decided, actually after we put out 1 print edition, we decided that we would retire the scope, and the core that had developed inside the resurgence of the scope would move on and create our own publication that would, in a lot of ways, cover the same genres of content, but we'd be free to do it in our own way and not be burdened by historical baggage.
Okay, so you've had a rebirth of sorts of your independent media. Do you want to talk about it?
Yes.
I guess maybe first you can explain the name.
They explain the name, yes. Yeah. The name of the magazine is HuK. And here's a little sneak preview of the cover of issue number 1. It's HuK with 2 dots known as umlauts over the U. HuK is short for HuK and Figure, which it's a play on words and phonetics. Originally, this word dates back a long time in my own personal history. At one point in time, I was messing around with silk screening and toying with the idea of creating a parody of a clothing line. In response to, say, the Guesses and Gaps and Abercrombie and Fitch and or Hilfigers of the world.
Okay.
I kind of mashed it all together and put it in a blender and came up with this idea of HuK and Figure, which, because who can figure what the next trend is going to be? And I never really went that far with it. I made a few iron-on decals and gave them T-shirts to some friends and family for Christmas, and they looked at me funny. And I said, all right. And I went back to sea and shelved the idea. And it wasn't until I started working with the resurgence of the scope. One of the things I did inside that operation was I created an LLC, and as a means of creating a legal entity. But I always had a bit of a misgiving that I wasn't sure exactly how this thing was going to work with the founders and myself. And so I created the LLC as a separate entity that was contracted to operate the scope as a project. So HuK and Figure Enterprises, I named as an inside joke to myself. And then, as this evolution occurred, it occurred to the nucleus that was operating the magazine that, hey, why don't we just call the magazine HuK and Figure? And then we
hope that the Hilfiger people don't sue you.
I'm sure they can't. We've got enough separation there, and they don't make a magazine.
Right.
Yeah. But anyway, so we shortened it down to HuK because that was the idea for the clothing line anyway. We're like, hey, so but obviously there's the phonetic play HuK and Figure. So it seemed to tie in really with what the mission of the magazine was. had become for me, which was creating an open conduit for community people to interact with each other and with the world at large in a relatively unfiltered fashion. You know, we have wide open doors. We don't filter for you know, political slant or anything like that. In fact, I actively seek out people from different camps and try to collect different voices. You know, and one of the recurring ideas is the idea of a mosaic. You know, we want to create a mosaic of where we live, and allow people to you know, view that mosaic in a condensed fashion.
Yeah, that's interesting to me. I went to a college that really only believed in people reading original sources. So, you know, if you took an ancient history course, you were reading Thucydides and, you know, the eyewitness accounts. So it sounds like what you're creating is kind of all those eyewitness accounts glommed together for the current day.
Yeah, yeah, to a certain extent, I could see that, definitely. You know, I think a lot of what is lost in the commercial media at large is personal connection, nuance. You know, a lot of my frustration and what's motivated me to do this and persist with this is that you know, I see the way things are depicted in the commercial media and the mass media. You know, you have us versus them dichotomies, red state, blue state, you know, and everything comes down to horse races and maneuvering strategy. It's so much is lost in the conversation. Not to mention the fact that, you know, we always end up with two parties on stage discussing things, as opposed to what I should think should at least be four. You know, I'm a firm believer that the real vigorous and most productive political conversation that needs to occur in this country should be occurring on a national stage between the Green Party and the Libertarian Party.
Well, you might have seen the minor party presidential debates last year.
Yeah.
And the conversation was much more interesting than in the major party debates.
A lot of overlap in some key areas, and then a lot of nuanced conversation in others where they differed.
And they asked questions that we would have liked to have heard the major party candidates talk about.
Exactly.
But no one was talking about GMOs. No one was talking about universal health care, really.
No.
You just didn't have, the questions weren't even being allowed to be asked. And I think Noam Chomsky once said something about that. The way to restrict people's thinking is to allow them to have a lot of dialogue, but restrict what they can dialogue about.
Yeah, change the frame. Like, you know, pull the frame in, and you know, and even better, like make it a polarized conversation where you know, you have people that are so entrenched for their team that they're willing to accept, you know, positions that they don't necessarily believe in, only because they want that candidate to win because it's the lesser of two evils, and you know, it's a failed model, and it's a disservice to our democracy. And I think the commercial media, for whatever reason, you know, that we won't get into that tonight, you know, has chosen, you know, well, or has become this thing that perpetuates a lot of this shallow conversation that you know, doesn't really resolve anything.
And it's kind of unfortunate. I used to think it was just because of the corporate ownership of media. You know, you might have 3 or 4 different TV stations and 3 or 4 different newspapers in an area, and they might really all be owned by the same people.
Right.
So that's a piece of it, but it doesn't explain New London because the day paper is a nonprofit.
Yeah.
And yet, I think it often falls into those same patterns.
I have a theory on that.
Okay, I'm interested.
I think at some point it goes beyond. It's not a calculated move. Perhaps it started as that, you know, but it became a pattern of behavior and sort of a level of expectation that the media would focus more on the gotcha style journalism, or you know, creating ratings by creating horse races or creating conflict where perhaps there should be none, or there wouldn't be any if, you know, the media had chosen to focus, whatever media it is, had chosen to focus on the unifying aspects first, and then like, well, and there's these differences, and you know, let's look at these differences, you know, and lay them out. You know, a lot of it has to do with just general language, linguistics, but yeah, it becomes a pattern. It becomes just a repetition of behavior. It's a learned behavior. You know, I think, you know, a lot of people that get into media, you know, have their own agendas in their heads, and you know, it's become celebrated now to try to advance that, as opposed to really trying to serve as a rational line of inquiry or a moderating voice between a contentious some contentious parties or over an issue.
Yeah, and that was illustrated in today's paper where they reported about last night's candidate forum, and one of the questions was about, you know, feelings about the Coast Guard Museum, and it was framed in the newspaper article. I think the headline was "Candidates Divided Over Coast Guard Museum," and actually, in reality, all the candidates pretty much agreed that the Coast Guard Museum could be a great thing, but a lot of the details hadn't been worked out yet, and whether it will really be boon or bust depends on how good a job we do at working out the details. On that, actually, in a sense, we didn't all agree on which direction the details should go on, but it really wasn't a divisive question at all. Right.
I can imagine. I wasn't there, unfortunately. I was stuck at work late yesterday, so I wasn't able to make it. But yeah, I mean, I can imagine that. Yeah, I mean, who wouldn't want that for the city? I mean, of course, it'd be great if it came through, but there are a lot of questions to be asked. And actually, like for issue number 2, a little, you know, primer for that. We are actually working on an article that's looking at the Coast Guard Museum and you know, the potential for that, and also the history of large projects in New London. You know, we've have a very long history here of great ideas.
Yes.
That you know, seem to get to a certain level and then suddenly go poof.
Yeah, and well, that could be a whole different discussion for a whole different show, or maybe a little bit for the second half.
Yeah.
But tell us what people can expect with issue number 1.
So issue number 1, politics, pros, and other points of view. That is the general overview of what we have. Well, as a magazine, we went out and reached out to a number of candidates for city council, as well as a couple of public figures that are outspoken, and asked them to write on a question. There's one question in 3 parts about New London, or their region around, depending on where they lived. And it's basically, what do you see as the 3 major concerns for the city or the region as a whole? And what do you see as the most logical solutions, and why? And gave everyone between 700 and 800 words to work on that, and with only one editorial suggestion / encouragement, which was we didn't want any personal attacks. We were heavily discouraging personal. We wanted to keep everything just looking at policy.
Right.
That's another thing, I think, and that kind of ties back into what we're talking about with the day. It's sensationalized journalism, sensationalized media. They seek divide, seek conflict. A lot of that are logical fallacies.
Right.
And ad hominem attacks. That does nothing for the conversation. Disparaging someone's character because of like a personal issue does nothing for the conversation. Really, politics is a derivative of the word policy. It is the discussion of an implementation of policy. Emotion has very little to do with it. Should have little to do with it. So yeah, we have 6 writers. I'll run down the list real quick.
Sure.
Marie Fries McSparron, Lori Hopkins Kavanaugh, Mark Sullivan, Rana Stuller, Caitlin Teal, and Laura Natush have all contributed pieces.
Sounds interesting.
Yeah. Well, it is very interesting, and I don't want to spoil what's inside. Did
you get any surprises, really, or did you feel like you already
the biggest
knew
surprise for me,
the candidates well enough that you know where they were coming from?
Yeah, there were no wild card surprises as far as what came out of a candidate's writing. What really surprised me, though, was the commonalities. There was a number across the board, really, and you know, I'll let people read and find that for themselves, but there's a lot more overlap and a lot more nuance in this political conversation in this city than you know, we might perceive from other sources. But we also have not just that's just the commentary section. What we call now under the column is going to be called "Who Can Say." So we have also featured artist, which I'll withhold the name on that one, but he's a guy that's been around the city a good bit. You know, was recently featured at the Hygienic. So we have a profile on him. We have a profile of local based, but he's actually like up and down the East Coast a lot. Music guy that's involved in music production. We also have a piece about the L&M labor dispute that's going on, and we also have a piece that discusses the police and some new equipment that is inbound to Connecticut and the nation at large. Across the whole country, there are a surplus of what's known as MRAPs that are being given away by the federal government, which mine-resistant armored personnel carriers or something like that. I forget what it's.
Okay.
Anyway, so there's a lot of good content
That one sounds
here.
absolutely terrifying, by the way.
Yes, yes. Yeah, and it's a great cause for concern and a good reason for people to pick up the magazine and get into it, because the only other coverage I've seen of that subject was in a New York Times blog. A blog, not even in the paper, not on the front page. It was on the website in the blog section.
Okay, so I guess my question is, when are you hitting the stands?
Tuesday, 1 week before Election Day. We had a little bit of a hold-up. We were supposed to launch this weekend, but I don't want to have the website go live without the print edition being on the streets, because some candidates have submitted pieces that will go on the website as a complementary component to this. So I don't want to give anyone, I don't want to, play fair.
So next Tuesday.
Yeah, Tuesday.
And the website, if people want to, before they see it on the stands, they want to go check it out on the website on Tuesday. What's the URL?
HuKMag.com.
Oh, that's easy.
Yep.
HuKMag.com?
Yep, or HuKMagazine.com. We have both, and both go to the same place. So, and then that'll go live on Tuesday as well.
Well, since we have about 3 minutes till the halfway point,
I
wanted to ask you, what do you need from people?
One more thing about content. Also, one of the more exciting things is we're establishing a relationship with Writer's Block.
Oh,
Writer's
that
Block
is great.
Inc. Yeah, so we have a number of young poets in here and writers who have contributed pieces, and we're probably a couple weeks away from inking a deal, all puns intended, that will hardwire the two operations together.
Great.
Yeah.
Now on the website too, are you going to have other media like video and?
Yeah. We, as always, the video department's a bit of a struggle, with limited funds and limited expertise. But we're coordinating with a number of local MetroCast shows to get DVDs. We want to create an online archive of all the shows that are hosted by local folks. And we have City Focus with Marty Olson, has been a long-time contributor. Thinking Green has been. And we recently got City Hall Live.
Oh, good.
So the mayor is now in the mix. And I think we just struck a deal with Kathleen Mitchell, too.
Hey, that's
So,
good.
Yeah, yeah, like the whole idea is the mosaic. You know, collect all the voices, you know, have access, you know, a central forum where people can go that, you know, and relatively unfiltered, you know. It's you know, we just want people to be able to speak civilly about these things and see people, you know, without any sort of filter, I guess, yeah.
Sometimes.
Not to be repetitive.
Yeah, and that could be a very positive thing in New London because sometimes people seem so angry with each other who actually are very close together.
Yeah,
and
it's
how
really
they
not
feel.
that big a town. It's not that big a town, and we all live here. We all have the right to feel and be heard, and there's no need to villainize anyone or you know, I think that's what we really need to move towards is more civility and more respect. You know, like my good friend, our good friend, Avner Gregory has been known to say, you know,
Yes.
respect, respect, respect. Yeah,
Now, are you looking for submissions for issue 2?
always.
Oh, just
No, always looking for submissions. We have a rolling deadline on the website. You know, always looking for anyone that wants to blog, anyone who wants to write an article, anyone that has something to say or something that, you know, they've collected, you know, audio, video. You know, we do have, my mission for this winter is to teach myself how to edit video so that, you know, that can no longer be an issue. And yeah, so we're always looking for content, you know, whether it's for the print edition or the website. You know, I can't say specifically we're looking for issue number 2 content. You know, we have some feature, like I mentioned, the Coast Guard Museum's in the works. We also have a story that we're working on about the Amistad. There's a lot of open gaps that need to be filled in. There's a narrative there that ties everything together that, again, the day's not really touching. They're poking at the dots, but they're not really weaving it together. So yeah, well, yeah, we're always open.
Okay.
Always open. Yeah. So again, anyone can email me, iancthomas@hukmag.com.
Okay, and you can find you online, I'm guessing.
Yeah, there'll be a contact us link on the website.
Starting Tuesday.
Starting Tuesday, when the website goes live, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Ian. We're going to go to our community calendar and switch chairs.
Excellent.
And be back in about 3 minutes or so.
Sounds good.
Okay, that
All right.
sounds.
Every sun rising, it brings another day. Ever realizing I'm the one who went away. If I could, I truly would come running back to you. Had enough of traveling, but what else can I do? Gotta keep on driving down the lone highway. Always I'm arriving, you know I never stay. Villages and farms and cities flash by in my mind. Wandering and wondering just what I hope to find. I hate to see that silver moon go down. Riding all night just to get me to another town. Yeah, but I hate to see the moon go down. 'Cause every day I have to pray I don't jump in a river and drown. Try to keep a moving even in the pouring rain. I can't win for losing, life is just a broke down train. pushing down the memories that pull me back to you. Sometimes it's more than I can do. I hate to see that silver moon go down, riding all night just to get me to another town. Yeah, but I can't abide the light of day. I used to see the black and white, now it's only shades of gray. Standing at a crossroads, can't decide what to do. I wanna turn the car around and head on back to you, but I had to leave it all behind. I put my foot on the accelerator, driving just to kill some time. I hate to see that silver moon go down, riding all night just to get me to another town. Yeah, but I had to leave it all behind. I turn on the radio, singing just to keep from crying. I turn on the radio, singing just to keep from crying. I turn on the radio, singing just to keep from crying.
All right. Welcome back to Thinking Green. My name is Ian Thomas. I'm the editor-in-chief of HuK magazine. For anyone who's been watching the last half hour, you know that. Now we shift into, I guess, what we can call HuK Can Interview. And I'm going to chat with Rana here, a city council candidate, about a few things. So first and foremost, one of the recurring themes, well, there's three major things that kept recurring through these articles, and that has been all around: public safety, economic development, and education.
Okay.
Now, education is the Board of Ed, so we'll put that on the side burner for now. If we have some time at the end, maybe we can touch on it.
Right.
But moreover, let's start with public safety. And I know the Green Party has some innovative views and rather unorthodox views, perhaps, as some might see, regarding public safety.
Yeah, I have to say, because the Green Party tends to be very pro-labor, I do fill out, as a candidate, all the questionnaires to request union endorsement. And I was endorsed by the Southeastern Connecticut Central Labor Council, but if the police union endorsed me, I would just faint.
You're not expecting their endorsement?
I am not expecting their endorsement.
Well, how was the interview process?
Actually, the interview was very interesting and kind of fun.
Okay.
And it's interesting that you can tell the difference among various unions by their questionnaires, and some are kind of progressive, and one of them even asked about property taxation and what alternatives are and how you feel about split rate taxation.
Okay.
But that wasn't the police union one.
Okay.
Other than the basics on, do you believe in, defined benefit retirement plans and that kind of thing, they were very concerned with whether you thought they should have 4 police dogs.
Okay.
They were very concerned about whether you think the number of 66, police officers was really too few, or whether we should go up, maybe as high as 100 or more. And I guess I framed the question in a way that was different from most candidates. I don't see the police as an end in themselves. I see the public safety as the goal. Police officers are one of the means to reaching the goal, but there's sort of a reactive part of it. There are a couple of things that the police do that are preventive, but for the most part, they're the ones that you call when there's a problem.
Right.
So what can we do to prevent crime from happening, and so we don't need to make so many calls.
Right.
And so that's really my focus. And some of those things relate to city infrastructure, like unique crowds. There's been a little bit of discussion over the fact that even though we have so few police officers right now in New London, the crime rate over the past year has actually dipped slightly.
Yeah.
I'm not sure the dip is significant, but it certainly hasn't spiked. It's remained kind of level.
Right, despite the
Right,
decreasing numbers of
right,
police.
and I don't deny that officers are probably stressed out. But crime hasn't spiked. So what's happened? And I think one of the things that's happened is there's so much going on in the downtown at night that there are more crowds on the street.
Right.
And eyes on the street are a huge part of safety in any city.
Right.
Cities aren't like the country. You don't pass through an empty field in a city and feel safe. You feel safe in a city on a crowded street. If you're passing this abandoned lot, you feel threatened.
Yeah, if you don't know what's around and no one else can see you.
Sure, and so we need more density yet in the city. So it's covered partly by zoning. It would be great to be able to solve the problems that are preventing upper stories from downtown buildings from being turned into residences. Some have been, but there are a whole lot of empty spaces there.
Yeah. Well, actually, it's interesting. With the magazine, we've been shopping around for office space, and we did look at a few spaces where, possibly we could have had the office and like a small art gallery out front and a living space in the back. And when we actually decided to try to go forward with that, we found that the application process for those exemptions was incredibly Byzantine, complicated, and obnoxious. It seemed like, if you wanted this to happen, if an administration or government wanted that to happen, that they would streamline it somehow.
Yeah, and I think everyone agrees that our zoning process is tough. And there are some real issues of like egress for safety purposes in the old buildings. But zoning, one of our views, the green views of zoning, is that the permanent part of the streetscape is the building. So you want any kind of reuse or renovation to respect the integrity of the building, keep the facades, keep the external features, and keep internal features also that are architecturally important, but you can modernize the inside to be used. And sometimes zoning seems to obsess over the use, like, is this use going to be appropriate? Instead of focusing on the building. So sometimes we get these really ugly buildings downtown, like the one near the parade. These ugly buildings, but why don't we focus more on what the buildings look like and not worry so much about the uses?
What could be done as a city councilor to correct the zoning?
Well, city councilors, the administration committee does approve planning and zoning commission members. That would be one part of it. I would hope that the council could work with the mayor and the Office of Development and Planning. I think the city planner would probably be responsive to a directive to try to shift things a bit.
Now, there's actually written code that concerns itself with the interior use of buildings, or is that just a choice by the zoning officer?
I don't think there's state ordinance, state legislation, but the Planning and Zoning Commission does regulate uses. And of course, when you look at the different zones, residential, single-family residential, some people might remember that the controversy recently about whether people can have backyard chickens. And that became a huge issue, and people can have backyard chickens, but most of the people with chickens, I have to tell you, don't follow the letter of the regulation that was passed, because once again, it was very complicated and very limiting. It doesn't assume that people we have neighbors with chickens.
It doesn't
you know, if there's a
personal
problem, we talk to
responsibility.
them.
Yeah.
They get in, we have their cell phone, get out.
Right,
we have their
right.
cell numbers, we can talk to them, and someone, you know, one of the kids of the family will come and gather up the chickens.
Yeah.
They don't have a rooster. That's a good rule, that you don't have roosters in the middle of a city.
Yeah.
But, so I think that just changing the emphasis of things, and there are communities that are looking at form-based zoning where, you know, if you look at the Chelsea Groton Bank
Yeah.
and the Dime Bank that were built in the downtown area, the Dime Bank got it all wrong because they're not built to the sidewalk.
Yeah.
The parking is in front, and you know, cities, because you have to have a strict definition between public space and private space, downtown you really need to have buildings built to the sidewalk for them to be successful.
Right, right.
Chelsea Groton built to the sidewalk, but you can't enter from the sidewalk.
Yeah.
They don't have a door. So the building looks fine. It looks like an urban building,
Yeah.
but you have to go around the back door through the parking lot to actually enter the building.
Yeah.
So a form-based code might say, if you build a building downtown, it's got to be built to the sidewalk. It has to have an entry onto the sidewalk.
Right.
Maybe a certain number of windows facing the street. So you create these architectural standards and just not worry so much about what it's going to be used for, because uses are temporary anyway.
Right. Well, that's one of the interesting things I think that probably Greens and Libertarians could find a lot of common ground on.
Yeah,
is
someone
that,
heard this and said, wow, you sound so conservative and market-based on this.
you know,
But that's fine.
and again, like, you know, why not just dispense with the labels and let's look at
Sure.
what the issues are and what works best to resolve them.
Yeah,
You know, but like concerned with, like, you know, how something interacts with the public in general, but not concerning with what happens behind closed doors is a great metaphor, I
Right,
think,
it
for
is.
like how any government should function.
and people don't realize, I don't think, that there was no zoning in New London before the 1950s.
Really?
So the city, the core of the city was built without zoning regulations. And what has happened since the 50s, since we instituted zoning, has actually been a lot worse planning than what happened organically for the first 200 years of the existence.
Well, that ties into question number 2.
Okay, economic development, right?
Yeah, economic development. One of the things that you've mentioned in past conversations and is in regards to Fort Trumbull and various other sections of the city, Hodges Square is another, allowing for and encouraging individual innovation and individual development, and trying to, I guess, restructure or maybe even eliminate the MDP, the Municipal Development Plan?
Well, the Fort Trumbull Municipal Development Plan was a disaster. And one of the problems in city suburbs seem to be very successful, and they seem to have been successful for the past 40 years. But that model where you aggregate property and build a huge project is pretty risky in a city area. For
Right.
for one thing, even when there isn't the kind of problem we had in Fort Trumbull where residents and homeowners were displaced and historic buildings were flattened, even when there was no controversy over it, you look at the Shaw's Landing condominiums, that took years and years and years to get approvals for, because when you aggregate properties, you can't start your project until every little encumbrance on every little piece is squared away. So
Right.
one part might have an environmental issue to be remediated, one part might have a legal title problem.
Yeah.
There can be all kinds of, so it just takes a long time, and development projects that take a long time, sometimes there's a downturn in the process. They're risky in any case.
Yeah.
And that it also adds to the expense. The Fort Trumbull MDP It never should have been what it was. There was a lot of land that the federal government gave to the city of New London. That was part of HuK, the Sound Lab. That
Naval Underwater Warfare Center.
The area north of the state park, which they did a fantastic job on, there was a lot of land there for development. You know, the Coast Guard Museum was originally conceived of being there. There was going to be a hotel there, but none of those actually were on the land where homeowners were.
Yeah.
So there wasn't really a good reason why the neighborhood had to be destroyed for development to happen around it. So what the Greens proposed as long ago as like 2004, I think, 3 or 4, they had an op-ed in the day paper, actually Bob along with Chris Nelson did, and their proposal was
5 minutes.
Oh, 5 minutes, wow. Rebuild the street grid,
Yeah.
and maintaining the street grid is a public function.
Right.
And then once you rebuild the street grid, parcel things up, sell the parcels off, small parcels, people could buy more than one if they wanted to aggregate them themselves, and let people build what makes sense.
Let it grow.
Let it grow.
Yeah.
So, you know, in terms of economic development, I think instead of trying to figure out who the winners or losers are going to be, the city should concentrate on really making infrastructure improvements, in some cases fixing the streets and sidewalks we have, and in some cases creating new grid where it was destroyed.
But basically create the infrastructure and let the people do as they will, like as they can. Again, another interesting overlap between Greens and Libertarians.
It is, and interestingly, I know some people, 4 minutes. Well, some people who consider themselves libertarians or conservative really don't like land value taxation. And I thought
that's question number 3.
Interestingly enough, there is a libertarian economist named Fred Folvery, who F-O-L-V-A-R-Y.
F-O-L-V-A-R-Y.
He's a California professor, a libertarian economist, who says that land value tax is the only tax we should have. Milton Friedman also called it the least bad tax.
The least bad tax.
The least bad tax. So there are many libertarians who, because you're paying according to what benefit you're getting from the commons that you've taken possession of, but you're not paying on the basis of labor or on the basis of production. All of those are really destructive. And some of these libertarians actually feel as though the land and you're staking a claim is the only thing that you really should be taxed on.
Interesting.
So we have like probably 2 minutes at this point.
Yes.
So I guess.
Well, that's education.
Oh, I have something to do in 1 minute.
Yeah, the ballot.
The ballot.
Yeah.
Some people don't know there are 2 questions on the ballot. They are related to approval of the budget. This is the budget for fiscal year 12 that closed out on June 30th. No one knows what will happen if the noes take it. Some people are interested in finding out and encourage people to vote no. I'd rather not pay the lawyers.
Right.
But, and then there are a very full row of Democratic candidates. The Greens and the petitioning candidates are a little farther down. You can go to the Secretary of State's website, and if you do a search on Town Ballots 2013, you can choose New London from the list and look at our ballot.
Just to be clear, this is a retroactive...
the budget question is a retroactive one.
Wow.
We don't have enough time for me to explain how it happened. But it is. It was because there were 2 petitions submitted last year, and the second one did not go.
Retroactive referendum.
So we hope the budget comes in under the budget, and then I think they'll be able to just reduce that budget. But if it's even or above, I don't know what's going to happen.
Well, let's hope we get yeses and just can move on from the thing.
But don't ignore the question, because I think some people won't ignore it, and, like the candidates, people should have their say.
Yeah, yeah, I'm definitely all for critical thinking and critical looks, yeah.
So we're down to our last 30 seconds.
Well, Rana, thank you for the opportunity, and
Thank
it's
you.
a pleasure, and I look forward to seeing you on City Council. Oops, did I just endorse you? It's a personal endorsement, not a publication.
Right.
Yeah.
And next week, Myrna and I will be on the show, and we'll just have a conversation and hope
All right.
people call in.
And there you can talk about education.
We can.
All right.
Well, thank you, Ian.
All right. Thank you, Ron.
And we'll see you next week.
All right.